very deep dive into standards-based grading and reporting to move the needle in our efforts in that area. And then we also want to talk to you tonight about our work in advanced academics.
All right, our first priority is curriculum review. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, so I apologize for any coughing I have tonight. So curriculum review is one of our priorities, and it's especially time sensitive right now because the state of Minnesota is implementing and adopting new standards in all of our 4 core subject areas over the next 5 years. So we tightly align to policy 612, which outlines our curriculum development, to create a process to ensure that we're implementing our new state standards with high quality curriculum and instruction. So our goal for our teaching and learning department this year was to ensure that we used our curriculum review timeline to ensure implementation of a guaranteed and viable curriculum, which just means that every student gets the same curriculum in a way that they can complete throughout the course of the year, aligned to state standards. We're finishing up science. We talked with the board about this last year. We did K-8 last year. And then we're doing K-12 PE, and then the English language, Spanish language arts standards are up next year. So we're also doing some preliminary work that Rachel Jens will be talking about shortly.
Yeah, we anticipate that as we prepare to review English language arts and Spanish language arts, that those areas will undergo some pretty significant changes over the next couple of years. We've got multiple measures that indicate that while we have been seeing some growth in student achievement, that level of growth on our MCAs, our MAPs, our local common assessments hasn't been accelerated enough to ensure that all students achieve grade level literacy or to close some of our persistent achievement gaps. We're also anticipating some legislation coming through rather soon that will also have implications for our local literacy plan and how we approach literacy instruction in our schools. So we've done a lot of preliminary work already to prepare for this review. Most significantly, we engaged all of our elementary staff in a review of our current instructional materials, which are the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project units of study. Part of that review was looking at how closely our curriculum is aligned to Minnesota standards, how well it's aligned to evidence-based practices in reading and writing instruction, and how supportive it is for differentiation for our students. And as you can see from just this one highlight of that evaluation, 92% of our elementary teams recommend that we make a shift in our curriculum. They feel like the curriculum is not supportive of their instruction and does not provide the differentiation needed for students. So they are having to make lots of modifications to make this work. So we will be starting to look at some new materials in the very near future. So I'll give you an overview of what that curriculum review process looks like, and this is applied to any subject area, not just English language arts and Spanish language arts, but it is the process that we'll be using for those upcoming reviews. So we start in phase 1, which is curriculum development. So during this phase, we're working with both the community, so with our District Curriculum Advisory Council, and with representative teachers on developing a purpose statement. What is driving us in our literacy instruction or that subject area instruction? We then work to align Minnesota standards and benchmarks to specific courses and grade levels. So in which course will each of those standards be addressed? We prioritize the most essential benchmarks for students to master at each grade level or in each course. And then those are the benchmarks that will be assessed with common assessments, which are assessments that every teacher who teaches that course or grade level give to their students. We'll also take time to review different instructional materials during that first phase. Once we have accomplished those things, we move into phase 2, which is starting to develop or select those assessments that I referenced, and then to also create units of study that have embedded differentiation models in them. Once that work is done, then we move into implementation. And that implementation phase is very closely monitored. So we support that implementation with ongoing professional development. We collect data to analyze how well the implementation of the curriculum is working for our students, and we monitor and make adjustments necessary during that phase. This gives you a timeline, an anticipated timeline of the progression of those phases. So at the elementary level, you can see we've already engaged in that evaluation of our current curricular materials. And then we will begin phase one very soon. Coming up in May, we'll be bringing together a representative group of staff that consists of classroom teachers, special education staff members, English learner teachers, interventionists, as well as some administrative representatives too. So we'll have a principal representative on that team as well. And we will start executing those tasks of phase one that I talked you through. We hope to start a pilot of new curriculum materials this coming fall, so fall 2003. We'd like to execute that pilot for 3 months and check in on the results of that. And if we feel confident that the materials selected are going to be a good fit for our staff and our students that are going to produce the results we're looking for, then we will move into phase two. If not, we'll be revisiting and looking for a different pilot to run. And then we are hopeful for a district-wide implementation with all elementary schools and grade levels beginning in fall of 2024.
And then for secondary, I just have a middle school and one high school. So it's a little less coordination, but a very similar format. So we want elementary to go first to pick their curriculum that they would like to pilot just for foundational reasons. And then based on that, that will be a data point, and we'll have our middle school team then look at different curriculum that they think they might want to pilot starting in the fall of this upcoming school year to launch a pilot for second semester, which would start around end of January, February. And then we would then kind of move into a similar timeline as elementary with a full implementation by fall of 2024. All right, and this is the timeline for the upcoming core subject area. So you'll see language arts we will hopefully have wrapped up next year with a launch by 24-25. In school year 24-25, we will begin social studies. In the following year, we will begin math, which puts us about 2 to 3 years ahead of when the state is expecting us to be at full implementation for each of these core subject areas. All right, our next big priority that we focused on over the last 2 years are our pre-K-12 learning walks. A learning walk is a short, informal, and unannounced classroom visit where a group of teachers or administrators walk into a classroom to collect a certain type of data to look for patterns. So we use the learning walk model to measure our equity policy here at Richfield Public Schools. And how we do that is when we launched, I'll back up, when we launched our equity policy 2 years ago, the number one question we received from teachers was, okay, this is wonderful, but what does this actually look like in our classroom? How do we meet the commitments that we've set forth? So we created what we call our teaching and learning practice profile, which really is just a document that outlines really specific expected practices around high quality instruction that we expect every teacher at Richfield Public Schools to use on a daily basis. And then we've divided it into different categories. So one's around how they build classroom community, one's around instructional clarity, which just means do the students know what they're learning and why they're learning it and how they show success, how the teachers deliver instruction, how we grade and give feedback, and then how we actually design our units. So we measure the expected practices on these things 3 times a year. And it's completely non-evaluative. There's no names attached. It's really just to look for holistic patterns across our organization to drive our professional development for staff to ensure that we're meeting the commitments we have in our equity policy. And this is our goal. So the one thing that we also make sure to do is that at our elementary sites, with our CLSD grant, which funds a lot of our literacy coach work down there, we make sure that we both measure the practices needed on that grant as well as our teaching and learning practice profile and equity policy to ensure that we have evidence-based practices being implemented in all of our classrooms and that our professional development is aligned to it.
So we've done 2 sets of learning walks in both literacy and math at the elementary level so far. We have another set coming up in May that we'll be doing. As we've done those learning walks across sites, I would say consistently, we've noticed supportive learning environments for students. So we're seeing very print-rich classrooms that have a high use of visual supports for students in addition to verbal instruction, and use of manipulatives, especially in mathematics, to make sure that students have opportunities to work with those concepts in a hands-on way. We're also seeing teachers making intentional connections between the content they're teaching and students' existing knowledge and experiences. We know that that's really important, getting students engaged in the content and what they're learning. We're also seeing a really good balance between whole group, small group, and individualized instruction in the majority of our elementary classrooms. And we're seeing teachers design and implement meaningful and challenging tasks. So we're not seeing students just doing a lot of worksheets. We're seeing them engaging in book clubs with their peers, reading for research, so posing questions that they're interested in learning more about and reading to find answers to those questions. In math, we're seeing them playing math games collaboratively, so working with peers to reinforce some of those social skills, and then doing things like math talks or working on problem strings that really promote high-level thinking in mathematics. Another strength that we're seeing is that we have teachers consistently using and modeling academic language for students and asking students to use that academic language themselves. Some of the areas for growth that we've noticed consistently across sites would be the alignment of lessons to clear standards-based learning targets and ongoing reference of those learning targets. So often we'll see a lesson introduced with a learning target, it will be posted, but it won't be referenced ongoing throughout the lesson. And so that's something we're working on. How do we do that naturally so students stay engaged with that learning target? We are also working on high-level questions and teachers using talk moves to promote more student discourse and peer interaction, and then the use of formative strategies to adjust instruction in real time.
At the secondary level, some of our strengths are we see overwhelmingly across the board very high levels of respect and rapport amongst our teachers and students, both student to student and teacher to student. Strong routines and procedures. Our students are spending more time on output than input, meaning they're writing and they're speaking more than they're just listening to a teacher lecture. One of our big focus areas at the secondary level is instructional clarity, so students really understanding what they're learning daily and how they meet success, and we've seen a great increase from fall to winter along that, which is wonderful because that's where we've aimed our professional development. And we've also seen a large increase in teachers' use of daily feedback to monitor instruction. This is also exciting because we've done a lot of professional development around standards-based grading, and a big part of that is making sure that teachers are giving students immediate feedback on their learning. And areas of growth are continuing to make sure that students understand the purpose of the lessons and that they find what they're learning relevant to their daily lives. This is an ever-changing thing when we have new students coming in, is something that we'll continually be working on. Another one is using flexible small grouping. So that means that teachers take a look at their lesson at the end of the day and say, okay, these kids got it, these ones didn't. How am I going to group my students to meet their needs? We see a little bit of that, but we could get more intentional at the secondary level. And then also increasing our peer interaction and student voice in the classroom.
All right, the next area we want to give you some updates on is our coaching model. So we know that research indicates coaching is one of the best ways to increase teachers' skill sets and to increase student learning and achievement as a result of that increase in teacher knowledge and skill. So we have all teachers, all elementary and early learning teachers, participating in one literacy and at least one math cycle throughout the year. Some teachers choose to participate in more than one. And at the secondary level, we've prioritized coaching for math and science teachers just because of the ratios of coaches that we have available at that level. This is what our coaching model looks like. So we follow a plan, do, study, adjust cycle. And so whenever a teacher enters a coaching cycle, it starts with a goal setting conference with the coach. They'll talk about some different sources of data to identify what they want to work on during the cycle. And then they will move into that do phase. So they'll create an action plan. Some of the things that might happen as part of that action plan would be having the coach model a particular instructional strategy in the classroom. One of the most popular things that's been happening this year as part of action plans is the coach will bring teachers to watch another teacher's classroom. So if another teacher has a strength in a certain area, the coach will bring that teacher in and then debrief on what they saw. The action plan might also include some co-teaching, co-planning, reflective conversations, could be looking at professional literature and talking about how that might relate to practice as well. But then as the teacher has implemented that action plan, the coach will come in and then do an observation to see what's changed in the practice as a result of the learning that the teacher has done. And then they'll end with a reflective conversation and make adjustments and talk about how are you going to continue on the changes that you've made in your instruction. So that is a typical coaching cycle for our teachers, both at the elementary level and secondary level. So a few statistics. At the elementary level, we have 4 cycles that align with the quarters of the school year. So you can see to date, we have had 77 of our early learning and elementary teachers out of a total of 86 participate in coaching. And our math coaches have supported 67 teachers in cycles 1, 2, and 3. We're just starting cycle 4, and so you can see we have teachers who will be participating in that final cycle as well. It is worth noting that in addition to doing the formal cycles, our literacy and math coaches also work more informally with our new teachers to support their instruction and their transition to Richfield and being in the field with coaching throughout the year.
At the secondary level, we have 100% of our science and math teachers undergoing coaching. The reasons we're doing science and math is to align with the curriculum review cycle. So the new science standards are a huge shift from the old ones. So there's a lot of need for professional development on a consistent basis. And then our math curriculum that we adopted at the secondary level about 5 years ago is also a big lift. And with the pandemic, it's just been honestly a bumpy on-ramp. So we've been supporting our math teachers as well. And we only have 1 coach at the middle school and high school level. So on top of doing the coaching cycle with all of our math and science, they've also worked with 46 additional teachers by request, which is up from 26 last year. So we had a coach who was on maternity leave for half of the year, so that's part of it, but it is exciting to see more of our secondary teachers opting into and volunteering to receive coaching support. And RSEP, sorry, Cassandra, RSEP also has 1 coach, and they're a little but mighty team. They meet bi-weekly all together and receive continuous coaching. All right, our professional learning communities is, I'm going to speak for Rachel. It's one of our favorite things that we've worked on over the last 2 years. It's been one of our biggest successes. All of our teachers meet in professional learning communities by grade level or at the secondary level by department. And one thing that we did last year was create professional learning community facilitators. So we created a stipended position through our QCOP funds for a teacher to become a leader of their group and take ownership of their agendas. And we've just seen these teams flourish and thrive and do amazing things across our organization. So this goal talks about some of the best practices that you want to see in PLCs, and this is how we train our PLC leads to ensure that they all get what they need to lead their teams. So the next slide includes what we include in our training. So we meet with all of our PLC leads 3 times a year. Last year was the first year we did this, so they all did the same training. 3 different times that walk through that data cycle that you see on the right-hand side. So the goal of PLCs is to set a year-long goal and then monitor your student assessment to ensure you're meeting it, and then also talk about as professionals, hey, like we really want to work on this together, or this is an area of growth on our team that we want to learn. So it might include having a coach come in or doing some review of professional literature. It's just a time for them to have a safe space to learn. This year, with this being the second year of our rollout, we've had some facilitators who are on year 2 and some that are new. So we've differentiated our lead trainings to meet the needs of the ones who are on their first year versus the ones who are on their second year. And again, we've just seen some amazing work across all the levels and teams, just really seen teacher leaders just really step up to the plate and do some amazing things with their teams.
So as we've gathered feedback from these PLC facilitators and or visited some PLC meetings ourselves, we've noted many strengths in using this model. So some of those strengths include, again, they're teacher-led. This is a departure from a model where some PLCs were led by the principal or the instructional coach. So we're really developing capacity in our teachers to become instructional leaders. We're seeing our PLCs setting very strong year-long student achievement goals, really professional conversations, using norms that guide those interactions. And then we're seeing more teams that are frequently looking at student work or data in order to inform their instruction. Some areas that we're continuing to work on, supporting those long-term goals with shorter, more incremental goals to monitor progress along the way. We're also looking to grow the amount of professional learning that happens during PLCs as well. So this spring, we will be administering an end-of-year reflection in order to identify the professional development that PLC facilitators need for next year, and then partnering with other stakeholders across our organization to make sure that all of the professional supports that we have, so coaching, our Q-Comp peer review model, that they all align and support this work together. Okay. The next area we want to talk to you about and update you on is our standards-based grading and reporting work. We've set different goals at the elementary and secondary level based on where each of those levels are currently at in the process of moving towards a full standards-based grading and reporting model. So at the elementary level, we have been implementing standards-based grading for a couple of years now. So we've been fully into implementing standards-based curriculum and instruction, standards-based assessment, very recently moved to standards-based grading, and now have fully implemented standards-based reporting as well. So our report cards are closely aligned to standards, and teachers are using common assessments, again, those assessments that all teachers at the grade level administer to measure students' progress on standards and then report that out to families. So some of the ways that we've gotten here, we've developed common assessments measuring students' achievement of those priority standards in several academic areas. So language arts, math, science, music, art, and physical education. We'll be doing that work for social studies as we go through that review process in the coming years. We've also developed common rubrics with 4 proficiency levels and use those to score the assessments. And then we've transitioned to having teachers report those scores in the Synergy gradebook. So Synergy is our student information system. The benefit of being able to do that is it's created some tools that we can use to engage in better data analysis with principals and with teams. I'll show you an example of a report that's available because of that shift in just a minute. And then, as I mentioned, we're listing out those priority standards on report cards. We have made sure that those report cards are available in both English and Spanish for our families. So here's an example of that report that I talked about. By having teachers use this digital gradebook in our student information system, we can actually track by each standard the percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding that standard, who are partially meeting that standard, and who are not yet meeting expectations around it. So it really helps PLCs direct what do we need to focus on in regards to those priority standards.
At the secondary level, last year when I talked to you, the circle was around assessment. So we've moved over to grading. So we've done a lot of work around, similar to what elementary has done, we're not at reporting, but making sure that our standards are what's living in our grade books. So on the next slide, it outlines the immense amount of work our teachers have done to get here. So during the pandemic and last year, every course identified the priority standards. So the standards that we're saying, we are going to assess these and they are going to live in our grade book. And then they've drafted summative assessments using rubrics for every standard. So not that we don't have some multiple choice, but we want to make sure that our assessments are rigorous and meet the complexity, especially at the secondary level as they get more complex within the standards. So that work has really upped the rigor in all of our classrooms. A big part of this was policy 601, which got rid of our class rank and weighted grades and also talked about our equitable grading practices. So we ensured that our building level grading practices match policy 601 with our teacher leadership teams. And then we created definitions for what does it mean to be proficient on a standard. And then teachers use those definitions to create their rubrics. And then RCEP has been the leader in this work. They have a building level rubric that they all use to make sure that they're all grading their assessments across their courses in the same way. So that occurred last year. This year we've taken it to the next step by making sure that the teachers understand the meaning of all the proficiency levels. So what does it mean to meet a standard? What does it mean to meet the exemplary level of a standard? And ensure that our grade books have numbers that match that in a similar way. And they've also been tagging standards in Schoology, which is our LMS, so that they can use some reports to see how students are doing on each individual standard to monitor instruction. And then we've done a lot of professional development around grading practices and standards-based education, and our teacher leadership teams have been immensely helpful in listening to our teachers and our students and finding out where there's sticking points, where there's been some trouble, and where we need to continue to provide support for teachers. So our celebrations, we've seen a decrease in our semester one fail rate. I think it went down a few percentages from last year. Students, we did a lot of listening sessions and surveys of students over the first semester, and students named more transparency and understanding how they're being graded on rubrics and what they need to do daily to be successful in class. We've had higher quality assessments made that really measure student learning. Instead of just having the multiple choice tests, there's actual projects. And we've tightened up deadlines to support accountability. So one thing we had to do with the pandemic is loosen up deadlines. Now that the pandemic is over, we need to do our students' service by tightening them up to get them ready for the next level. So we've tightened up when things are due, and we've had some hard stops at quarters just to set those academic expectations. And then our next step is just to continually provide PD around what does it mean, what is the mindset that needs to take place to understand standards-based education. And I think one of the hardest things is we all went to school where points were used as a classroom management tool. So you got points for being on time, you got points for participating in class, and that can sometimes lead to inequitable grading practices. So what's happened is teachers struggle, they've lost a classroom management tool without having that. So we've been teaching teachers how do you still get students to motivated to do the work in class, turn their work in, and a lot of that comes through giving them immediate feedback and helping teachers and students understand why they're doing what they're doing and how it's going to help them in that class and beyond. And then the last thing we'll continue to do is listen closely to our stakeholders, to our counselors, to our parents, to our teachers and our students, and see if we want to transition to standards-based reporting at the middle and high school level. And that could land in two different spots depending on the level and what those stakeholders say.
All right, thank you. You've been so engaged.
No,
we're wrapping it up here by finishing off talking about our advanced academics programming. So we set a couple goals here at the elementary level. We are working to increase the number of students of color who are participating in both our enrichment and our acceleration programs to be representative of our Richfield Public Schools demographics. And secondary, very similar goal, working to increase the number of students of color who are enrolled in our advanced courses, our college in the schools, and advanced placement classes to also be representative of our demographics here. And then also working to strengthen college and career pathways starting at the middle school level. So at the elementary level, we have slightly increased the number of students of color participating in our enrichment and acceleration programs, but it is worth noting that we are still seeing continued underrepresentation of BIPOC students in these programs. So this is something we are continually working to address by making adjustments, first to how we're identifying students. So we've taken a little bit of a departure from looking at our traditional standardized test measures, and we are adding in our local assessments, so our classroom-based assessments. We're also adding in growth measures, so looking at how much growth students are making from one assessment to the next. We're also exploring changing some of our programming to be more inclusive of providing opportunities for talent development, traditional activities, critical thinking skills, and problem solving to all students. And we would do this through a project-based learning approach. We want to tie those projects into the curriculum so there's an intentional connection between what students are learning in their reading classes and their math classes, and then an opportunity to extend that to a real world project. So we would accomplish that by having our talent development teachers partner with classroom teachers and just expanding access to all students. Some things to celebrate. We had a significant increase in the percentage of students of color participating in our second cohort of fourth grade accelerated math. So our first cohort had about 29.41% students of color, and then as a result of some of the changes in identification that we made, we did increase that in our second cohort to about 34% of our students. We are seeing that students who have been identified to participate in accelerated math in fourth and fifth grade are being very successful at meeting or exceeding both their grade level standards and above grade level standards. So the model is working really well to be supportive of those students. Next steps I alluded to, we're going to continue to use multiple measures to identify students for participation in our accelerated courses. And then we're also going to work on expanding those enrichment opportunities through project-based learning in grades K through 3.
And at secondary, we place students into middle school, high school as a self-selection model, so you can see our numbers for advanced ELA and math, and we have made some significant improvements, but we still have work to do to have our demographics match the high school overall, or the middle school overall demographics. These are our demographics in our college and the schools classes, our U of M courses that we have within the high school. We have quite a few courses which the University of Minnesota calls their entry point project, which are aimed for first generation college students, multilingual learners, and students that fall in between the 50th to top 20th percentile of their class. So those courses have more representative demographic data, which are going to be our CIS education, CIS college algebra modeling, CIS physics, physics by inquiry, and CIS writing studio. And then our next slide has our AP demographic data. And our AP data is more representative because we have our DLI program at the high school uses 2 AP courses. So that course is going to be 50% students of color, and then we do the AP Human Geography for all students at the 9th grade level. So some of our successes is that our courses that we offer at the high school level match student interest. So what we do is every year in January, before registration takes place, we send out a survey to all students that asks them to pick which classes they're interested in taking, which content areas, or like which topics they would like to learn more about. And then we ensure that our courses match those levels of interest. And then students get to select any course they want to take. So there's no barriers to taking a college in the schools class or taking an AP class. They can self-select in. And then, as you know, we also have the seminar model at the high school with those support classes to support students who maybe want to take a chance and try a class that they might be a little bit more uncomfortable with but want to challenge themselves in. The entry point project courses with CIS have been a major success. Those courses are wildly popular at the high school. They fill up every year and they match our demographics. We usually have at least 2 to 3 of each of those courses running in our schedule. And because our self-selection model at the high school has been so successful, we would like to bring that down to the middle school, starting with our 8th grade class in English Language Arts and having that become a self-selection model with eventually having 7th and 8th grade be self-selected in, so students, especially in middle school, as they're cementing their academic and identity, can start seeing themselves as honor students in areas in which they want to challenge themselves. And then our next steps will be working on, partnering with the middle school to get that up and going, which we're working on right now. And then looking at our college and career pathways to see which careers are our students interested in engaging in, and how do we have alternative routes to get our students there. So we have strong computer science coding classes in our high school. We've added this year a CIS coding class. And we're looking at partnerships with some business industry partners in the area to find ways for students to enter into a family-sustaining, wage-earning career 1 year out of school. So that's an area of work that Jonathan Heyer and I are partnering on, and is exciting work to get going for our high school. And that wraps up our very long board presentation. So we will turn it over to you for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, questions?
I have a couple. You mentioned pushing the self-selection for the more rigorous courses into 8th and 7th grade. Would the middle school then also have the seminar model to support students?
No,
to encourage them?
No, we've talked about that. I think because it's middle school and there's more flexibility with grades, we would just make sure that we had strong differentiation and support within the class. If we're seeing a need for more intensive support, we can look at ways that we can use advisory or some of the things within their schedule to support students in the way that they need.
Okay. And similar question then, right, as we look at sort of the enrichment and the accelerated math, and that's largely driven by the adults, I imagine, right, the young people, but in terms of encouraging students, we don't have the real estate on the schedule for like seminar-like supports there as well, correct?
For the middle school?
No, for K-5.
Oh.
Yeah, no, we don't have a seminar, but I would say our elementary teachers are a little bit more versed in differentiation strategies. So at the elementary level, what happens is that 4th and 5th grade accelerated class replaces the core math class that they're taking. It's taught by a talent development teacher, and they will still use small group strategies in there to work with students who maybe are struggling in one particular unit and need some extra help in that area.
I mean, that's the topic of the math curriculum has come up a few times when we speak of the sort of the CIS or the AP courses at the high school, because you don't just sort of decide when you're a junior in high school you want to take calculus. There's a huge chain of information you're supposed to have already been comfortable with, and so it's really critical that we accelerate as soon as we can and try it with supports, though, so that the students aren't just sort of put in a position of stress and have a bad outcome. And so, I don't know, I would encourage anything we can do to grow it earlier and with the supports that are necessary, because that among the curriculum we have is one that really does depend on your preceding classes. So, all right, so that was that one. Jumping to a couple other comments. Really just that, and going back to the curriculum review. So we're currently about to kick off phase 1, is that right, for the language arts?
That is correct, yep.
So I mean, that's been in the new, like, actual, even mainstream press, or
It has.
not just the educational press recently for types. And so it's exciting to have options like that seem to have had sort of broader success in other places, sort of like staring right in front of us. Although it's generating excitement, I imagine next year's social studies kickoff will also generate excitement as well. So it'll be a sustained level of excitement. But I am very excited for what we can do with the language arts curriculum, and because that's also been an area of, we've tried some things and they have not necessarily worked in the way that we would want, like modest gains, but we need to have sort of a discontinuous jump in achievement. So whatever we can do to facilitate that would be great.
Yeah, I would add that in addition to doing that preparatory curriculum review work, we do have a significant number of our elementary educators, close to 40 educators who are currently going through letters training, which is a very intensive professional development course that's focusing on the science of reading and how the reading brain puts all of those pieces together. So about 40 educators currently participating. We have another 10 who have committed to starting this summer. So.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Carter, any questions, comments?
I do. I just jotted down another comment to make sure I don't miss any.
What did you just say?
Sorry, I was just,
He's organizing his thoughts.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
thank
finishing.
you for translating,
Well,
yeah.
I wanted to start by following up on what Tim just said. You know, because what I heard when we're thinking about like promoting classes, right? It's like in the younger grades, right? It's like you need the parents really to be pushing the kids harder. And so to Tim's point, right? It's like if the parents aren't pushing, then the kids miss out. And if they miss out like that first grade, then it's a I want to call it a chain reaction effect, right? Because effectively, I mean, I remember myself, I was in the same boat where it's like I was a junior or soft freshman in high school going, I want to do calculus my senior year, and I ended up having to take summer school to catch up because I'd been pushed back a grade because in my case, I'd been held back. And so, you know, how do we help promote that for the younger kids? You know, it's like if the families aren't pushing for it because they're like, we're just happy you're going to school and you're doing well, but they could do better, right? It's like, how do we as a school help push that? Or have we given thought? I mean, I guess it's almost like a rhetorical question, but it's, have we given thought for how we can help push that?
Yeah, I think what I alluded to in terms of having more of those talent development opportunities for all. So having the talent development teachers push in during a math unit or at the end of a math unit to talk about, you know, how do you apply what you've just learned in this unit to a real world situation, and really making sure that it is problem based can be one of those ways to motivate kids if they feel some success in doing those projects, and then just learning about what those opportunities are, right? That starting in 4th grade, you can have the opportunity to participate in our accelerated math program, which would, you know, prepare you for that. Most elementary students aren't thinking, you know, as you alluded to, that, you know, I want to take a college level class, but we've intentionally created on and off ramps where if you're just looking for more of a challenge in elementary school, you can be involved in that cohort. And maybe you get to middle school and you think, you know, I really enjoy math, but it isn't the area that I see myself going into the future. I want to kind of slow my roll and take more advanced courses in other areas. That's an option as well. Or they can keep going along that path. So those on and off ramps are really important.
And at the middle school, we have, previously it was 5th to 6th grade was the year. Like if you hadn't been on-ramped, it was hard to get on. So we've built some extra on-ramps at, after 6th grade and after 7th grade to get on-ramped into a single accelerated course. And then we also have it the option at the high school, which some of our students have partaken in, is if they expressed interest in taking CIS Calc or they want to expedite their math, they could double up on geometry and advanced algebra and take those at the same time with a support class with teacher approval and parent approval, so they can get to CIS calculus in high school if they realize later in their academic career that that's something they would like to do.
Okay. I don't know if it's along those lines, but are we looking at the special education classes or special education students to see if there are kids that have been overlooked? And so because of the fact that they kind of got into the special education program maybe because of behavioral issues, now the teachers are so focused on those issues that they're missing that they may be talented in other areas.
Yeah, we look at, when we place, we look at every student, despite any label that they may have.
And what criteria are we looking at when we
Yeah.
place? Just I'm thinking of like my children, and I'm like, you know, it's like if they don't test well, right? So it's like if they don't test well, then that's another knock where you might look over because if that's your criteria.
Yeah, so we do use grades, and we look at grades across the whole year because we are now in a standards-based grading system. That measures how they're doing on the priority standards. We look at growth on the map, and we look at how they're doing on the map test. So it still is, we have some high-stakes tests also built in with classroom level assessment too.
Same at the elementary level. So multiple measures include the COGAT, which all students take in second grade. That's a test that's frequently used to identify students for gifted programming. But we also then will look at multiple years of MAP scores, MCA scores, as well as those classroom-based, standards-based assessments as well. And then we also look at growth on the MAP test too.
Since I'm still on math, so how are we getting feedback and issues fixed? Like, how are we getting a feedback loop? And I say that because apparently as a family, we stumbled on one of the grading problems. And so, you know, if a student gets 10, 10, 10 on tests and then 8.5, the highest they can get is 8.5. So one of our children was challenging us, saying, why can't, you know, mathematically speaking, if I got 4 numbers, that doesn't add up. How are we getting that feedback back into the system?
Yes, I know, I am aware of this issue. So what we do is whenever, especially because we're moving to standards-based grading, and honestly, the higher the level you get, the more challenging it becomes for teachers and students because they're just changing patterns and ways they've been taught to interact with grades. We have given surveys out to students. We are closely monitoring grade books. If we're seeing any issues, we've had a lot of meetings with teachers. In your instance, Eric, we sat down and we talked about how teachers are grading, how it should look. And honestly, there's been some unintentional mistakes made or just like learning curves with transitioning to the standards-based grading. So it's an iterative process, and we have gotten feedback from students, teachers through surveys, listening sessions, and from principals is looking at data to see what we need to do to continuously improve and make sure that students are getting equitable and fair grades on their learning.
I've got more. So process rigor, or I guess rigor in studies. You know, it's, we hear, or I've heard from a number of families that have left our district, and when they go to another district, they're like, oh man, it's like, it's so much harder. There's so much more rigor in this school. How are we ensuring that we're forcing our kids to study, that we're forcing the rigor in our district? So that when people come here, they go, wow, Richfield is really like, they're pushing harder than we've ever been pushed.
Yeah. So what I can say for our math curriculum in particular is we use CPM Math, which is a curriculum that we have purchased that many districts across the country and Minnesota use, including some of our local districts that have reputations for being very rigorous. It's actually so rigorous that it's been a challenge with the pandemic to help our students meet the expectations in that curriculum. So I don't really think it's a problem of rigor. What I will say is I too talked with quite a few families that exited out of the middle school, going in from coming from elementary to middle school, and expressed concerns around that. And when I dug in to find out more about what the concerns were, they named SEL reasons, so that they wanted their students to be with their friends or in a certain class. And when we place, we really do it as equitably and fairly as we can. So we use multiple data points. We look to make sure that we aren't privileging certain students or holding students back, and that we're using multiple measures to put the right students who need challenge in the class. And what I will say is a lot of these parents that have exited have gone to programs in other districts where they have disproportionate numbers of white students in class. So I would question if it's a rigor problem or if there's maybe some coded language around why they're exiting.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the tough questions too. It sounds a little bit like we're experimenting on our kids. And what I mean by that is we're trying new practices, which I'm not saying is bad. I want to be clear, because experimenting sounds like we're doing something we shouldn't be doing. Because if it goes really well, then this is awesome, right? But if our kids are struggling, then it's like, well, then what, right? And so I guess my question is as we're trying new things, or we're trying to change the way in which we teach, which I think is good, how are we making sure that we're not doing them a disservice if it didn't work, right? So I just think about the pie chart you showed early on that said, 90% or whatever said we don't like this. So then the assumption would be is that they were struggling, and if the kids are struggling, how do we make sure those kids who are in the situation, get caught up?
Yeah, with that pie chart, was at the elementary level. Our teachers very naturally will supplement the curriculum and will do that differentiation, right? So if there's a practice in the curriculum or the curriculum is set up in a way that's not necessarily supporting students in being successful, our teachers do a lot of differentiation to help them be successful. The unfortunate part is that creates a lot of workload for them. So we want to upfront make sure that we're choosing resources that promote instructional practices that have a strong evidence base behind them, that they have been proven to lead to results, so that we don't feel like we're experimenting. There's never going to be a perfect curriculum that addresses everything that we want it to. And there's always going to be that art of teaching and science of teaching at play. But we want to set our teachers up to be able to implement evidence-based practices without having to do a lot of that extra work on their own.
Okay. Just checking if you want to respond to.
She said it beautifully. I was just going to echo that we, whatever we put in front of our students, we ensure it's evidence-based and there's research behind it. So that's one of the nice things about the CLSD grant, is that teachers are getting trained on evidence-based practices, and everything we look at has multitudes of research behind it. And times change and studies change, and we have to make sure that we're changing with the changes that are coming our way with the research.
Well, then, to that end, how do we instill consistency across teachers? I mean, I appreciate the learning walks, the coaching, but what if I'm resistant, right? How do I make sure, right, how are we sampling to make sure that the teachers are doing the same thing?
I would say, our job in our role, our first step, is to make sure that we're measuring and we're monitoring. So I love the statement that what gets inspected gets respected. So I think that we have really worked hard to create a culture of coaching and a culture of high expectations for our staff. And with our PSL leads and our teacher leaders, teachers, the number one influencer comes from their colleagues. So the more we can lift up teachers to have these evidence-based practices in their classrooms implemented well, that's going to be the number one way to push staff instead of coming over them with a hammer. So we're trying to it takes time, but build a culture of coachability and being open to change and trying new things. And also that's where the principal comes in. If there's individual cases where a teacher's struggling or needs more support, then we have individual conversations with teachers to see what they need. Is it an issue of skill? What skills do they need? And that's where our coaches can step in, or Rachel and I can step in from a director role to give them what they need.
So I like to hear that the teachers are lifting each other up. The question is what if they're feeling overwhelmed, overtaxed, or don't want to participate, right? And so they're, instead of taking the opportunity to learn more on their PLCs, I'm saying that right, they're trying to figure out, how do I take the easiest one, or how do I go ahead and be with my friends? How are we monitoring that?
Yeah, I attend a lot of PLCs, our coaches attend PLCs, our principals attend PLCs. So one of my favorite things about Richfield is that we're little, so we can usually have someone there to support. And I would say, I know that's for sure happening at the middle and high school level, and I know Rachel has spoken to that at the elementary level too.
Yeah, our coaches do frequently consult with PLCs, and if there is one of those issues, we can also get supervisors involved, right? I think influential power can be really, really strong, though, and when teachers hold each other accountable, that often creates shifts that we want to see, rather than coming down hard with the hammer and saying you have to change this. But certainly if there are job performance issues at play, there are corrective actions that get taken.
And then with language arts, why aren't we coaching language arts?
Oh, why aren't we at the middle school?
Well, because you said you were coaching math and
Yeah.
the other one.
And science, yeah.
Thank you.
So we based it on the curriculum review, and honestly, because of the CPM curriculum being so rigorous and such a shift in what teacher practices, we've continued to offer coaching just based on walkthrough data, seeing that we still need to offer support. We will work with principals and coaches and teachers to talk about what areas we'll support next year, and I envision once we adopt a new curriculum, we'll shift our coaching support to ELA at the secondary level.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for being patient with me.
of course.
Okay.
First, I want to say thank you for the presentation. My question is, so what does the new like curriculum material look like, or what's like the difference between like the one we use right now to the one we probably will use?
Yeah, we haven't picked a new curriculum yet. We think it's really important that the teachers who are going to use the curriculum are highly invested in that process. What I will say is we'll be bringing 3 or 4 different options to them. Some of the biggest differences include a stronger focus on what we call foundational skills at the elementary level. So a heavier focus on those early learning about letters and the sounds that those letters make, learning how to blend the sounds in a word together so that students get really good at being able to decode words so that they don't have to spend so much time sounding out words that it interrupts comprehension. So I'd say that's one of the major differences we're looking at. We're also looking for a curriculum that more purposely integrates social studies and science concepts so students have the opportunity to build knowledge about a particular subject in those areas.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for this presentation. It was very nicely done. I would just want to ask, with the CIS classes, I remember me personally like taking a CIS class. I remember last year there was a lot of like confusion and like not as much transparency, and I think Paula can also attest to this with me. Last year there were a lot of, like for English classes, there were like, oh, you have to be in like this percent to do like either AP or CIS, but some of us were like, okay, like some like teachers would say you're too high up to do CIS, so you have to be in AP, or you're too low to, so like how do we become more transparent with yes, you can do this, but there are also rules and regulations that you need to face before you take these CIS classes?
That's a great question. So the class you're talking about is CIS Writing Studio, and that was added last year. The AP Language and Composition course is more challenging than the CIS class, and the CIS class offers, like if you pass the class, you get the credit, whereas AP, you can take the class and maybe not get the credit. So CIS and AP have some recommendations around grade level and what class rank you are. Now, it should never be a reason why you don't get into a class if you want a challenge, but I'm guessing that's where your teachers are coming from, is just counseling students into, based on your grades and how you're doing, what class would be the most appropriate. But that's really good feedback, and I'll bring that back to our counselors and teachers to talk about how we are counseling students into courses this year.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. So I think you were talking about policy 601, and you were talking about dismantling like ranks and also weighted GPAs. And me, Paula, and Elsie were a part of Spartan Crew, which is like an intermission of like, oh, these 8th graders, they come and they ask students like, what is it like? And I remember a lot of students asking me, okay, like if our GPA isn't ranked, then what's the point of taking an honors class? What's the point if there's nothing really affecting my academics? And I'm just like, how do I respond to them? Because I understand the frustration, but I also know it's like for their mental health.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we've transitioned to Policy 601, we also have made sure that our honors classes are concurrent enrollment, which means that you're getting a college credit with a high school credit. So that is the inherent reason to take it, is that you're going to earn a college credit while you're in this class. Now, honors, we have honors English, which is not, English, honors English 9 and 10, you're not getting a college credit, but those courses are going to give you those extra skills to be really successful in the AP and CIS classes. So I would say for incoming 9th graders to think about what are they interested in, how do they want to challenge themselves, and what courses do they need to set themselves up for success, which can be hard to think about when you're in 8th grade, but important too.
Okay, 2 more questions. Another question I want to ask is, so I saw like little like the results of like people of color taking CIS classes and AP classes. I was also wondering if we have results for those kids that are passing the classes, because I know it's important that we show that, oh, they're enrolling in these classes, but I think it's also very important to show that, okay, are they all passing these classes or not?
That's a great question. I think you should be a board president in your future. So we do track the grades data very closely across all the classes at the high school, and especially our CIS classes. to make sure that students are doing well. And we have very high success rates and pass rates in our CIS courses, especially because if you fail a CIS class, as you probably know, it's on your permanent transcript. So we want to make sure students are given the support they need to be successful.
Okay, final question. So I remember being in elementary school and like the gifted and talented program, I was like in the middle because I was like really good at like school and like doing assignments, but I wasn't so good at like taking tests. And I feel like if we're really big on like assessment, some kids aren't good at taking assessments, but they excel in the classroom. So how do we like shift further from assessments and look at, is the student actually gifted and talented based on not only their test score, but also like how they participate in the class?
Yeah, so when I talked about the multiple measures we use at the elementary, some of those are those traditional tests. But when we talk about classroom-based assessments, a lot of that is more based on students' daily performance. So how are they doing on performance tasks? So we're starting to include more of those measures to make sure we're identifying students who, like you referenced yourself, get nervous or just aren't great test takers. But then also when they do take tests, not just their overall achievement level, but how are they showing growth across those as well. So, but a lot of those classroom-based assessments are more performance-based. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you for mentioning that, like, the purpose of this, like, new implementation of this, like, new experimental curriculum is to do more, focus more on the output rather than the input. Because I know sometimes, especially in some certain classes, in my time here, it's like sometimes just listening to teachers just talk, and then just get a worksheet feels more like a do-it-yourself class in a way that you have to navigate the class on your own. So I really appreciate that the focus is now getting shifted on, like, what is the actual output that students are basically demonstrating. But I also I'm like curious on, because like we're trying to integrate like students' ways of like pronunciation and like their reading skills. How is that being integrated with those students that English is not their first language?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, so a lot of the curriculum tools that we're looking at have some specific supports built in for multilingual learners. We're also making sure that all of the curriculum that we're looking at has equitable components, so equal components available in both English and Spanish, since the largest percentage of language speakers would be students who speak Spanish in our system. Students are not penalized, when they are still working on their English language skills. We are really intentional about trying to determine if a student is struggling because they're still working on oral language skills versus they're not actually understanding the content.
Mm-hmm. And then, like Chimsley was previously mentioning about like transparency, I know because of like the rank, like we heard in our Spartan crew retreat how like some students are like, what's the point of taking these advanced classes? I feel like there should also be like transparency regarding like why you should take the classes, not only because you're going to get the college credit, but also like how do we like, because we really emphasize like college and career readiness. Like I feel like transparency can also be like, if we mention like, hey, if you're interested in like going to business analytics, maybe we suggest taking like CIS statistics, because not only are you going to get the credit, you're going to get the experience and then test out and demonstrate your skills if this is really something you want to do. I feel like transparency in that is also very important and vital for students to feel motivated to take these classes, not only for college credit, but rather to test out their interests and see if this is like an interest they want to pursue in college, or if this is something that they might just take to experiment with.
Thank you so much for that feedback. That's really powerful, and I think something that we can bring back to our counseling team and our high school administration. And this is why we love having the students on our board to give us really good feedback, because you are all the ones living what we're presenting up here. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, and I'm going to go really back in the very beginning, so bear with me. For public conversation, would you tell us a little bit more about, when I look at the statistics about what 92% of the 25 teachers who took this answer this question didn't really, I don't know how to say, appreciate or didn't think about the curriculum. So I'm concerned about that. especially because I know that it hasn't, we, can you tell us a little bit more about that, how that happened? Because it's like I think when we are teachers, especially in elementary, we spend quite a lot of time doing literacy and embedding social studies standards with it, because we took social studies time from, so that we could focus more on the literacy piece. And I also know, to your point, that there is a lot of very strong push. It looks like we are going to have this new READ Act, and I'm glad to hear that we're already doing letters and more of the science of reading. But I guess what I'm going is, I know it hasn't been a long time since we started doing literacy with the new way. And since you are going to go through a curriculum review, and I do remember that we kind of went through this review process not long ago, I want to make sure that we get it right. Because that's really, it's very imperative. You look like you want to take this one.
No, I was just going to mention the COVID dog years, because I believe it was about 6 or 7 years ago we actually
So it hasn't been, it wasn't like 3 years like in my head.
It was
Oh,
not
good.
3 years ago. And obviously, and I'll let Rachel tag in a second, obviously, science of reading has become much more popular during
Yeah.
that window.
Yeah.
I think our teachers and the selection committee did not quite understand the challenge with implementing the Teachers College Lucy Calkins curriculum. It's a very thorough curriculum, of which, rather than a 1 or 2 page lesson, it's typically about a 10-page lesson written in prose and very elegant language, and so it is very time-consuming to implement. And then I also am not sure, 7 years ago, we understood the same level of the importance of phonics, of which there is a phonics
I know
block,
we
and-
didn't, and
Right.
that Lucy Calkins doesn't have it, so.
And yes, we worked on that phonics block, so it has a separate phonics block, and we were implementing right before COVID hit.
Okay.
And so it was a confluence of additional timing, and now we are knowing that we need, obviously, a transition. And so our teachers have certainly spoken on that. Rachel?
Yeah, so that review came, when you see 25, it wasn't 25 teachers, there's actually 25 teams. So each team, so each grade level team sat with the materials and they looked at it through a lens of, when I look through all of these lessons, are they actually hitting Minnesota's English language arts standards? So that was one of the criteria. Another was, is there differentiation provided? Does it align to the science of reading, to evidence-based practices in reading instruction? How supportive of it is it for me when as an elementary teacher, I'm planning, 5 different subjects and small group subjects in there. As Dr. Yanowski referenced, it's the lessons are written in a way that isn't clear, like, here's the learning target for the day and here's your set of activities. It's a lot to navigate through. Another big issue was that at RDLS specifically, a lot of the materials are not available in Spanish, and so teachers were doing their own translations. So, we look at that alignment to standards, alignment to evidence-based practices, and how supportive the materials are of the teacher. There are lots of really high quality pieces to the Lucy Calkins curriculum that it could be successful, but it takes a very, very highly skilled teacher, probably a teacher who has advanced training, a reading specialist license, for example, in order to implement that well. And so we want to set our teachers up with something that is easy for them to implement, but that's also very closely aligned to what we're now learning about how the brain learns to read. So all of the new materials that we'll be looking at have high ratings on Ed Reports. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Ed Reports is independent studies, right, of different curriculum materials. And so we'll be looking at materials that have high ratings on that, that do have materials available equally in Spanish and English, so that translation burden doesn't fall on our immersion teachers. And then we'll go through a very similar process to what teachers did with the current curriculum to look at how aligned are these proposed materials to our standards and to those evidence-based practices.
Thank you. Especially as a former Spanish immersion teacher elementary, that when you do translate something, the level, comprehension level changes, either higher or lower, because the number of words increases most likely. Which brings me to a question that I have about when you were talking about, teachers filling the gaps or they adjust. I find that concerning because it can go really well and it cannot. It can fall back into old patterns, especially if we have been teaching for 30 years. With the best of intentions, of course, but I believe of what works and what not. So I think as I think about what a great opportunity that we're doing this now, that we are ahead of, like, sounds like getting ready for coming changes to the ELA curriculum and all of that, but that how would you think, we don't do learning walks all the time, right? And so how are you observing for those changes to make sure that we can support our teachers? Do they reach out to principals like, this is not working on and I'm just gonna do it and who knows? What kind of gauge do you have about, the comings and goings on of the lesson planning?
Yeah, so our coaches get very involved in that. That's why we have all of our teachers going through at least one cycle of literacy coaching where the coaches can give feedback on that sort of thing. I would say another thing we do is we have a learning academy model too. So we have a lot of teachers who are participating in professional development throughout the year, talking about some of those things that you brought up, right? So they're trading ideas with each other to create consistent practice across the sites.
Thank you. And then I noticed when you were going over the glows and grows of the learning walks, I noticed in the growth areas, something that I do remember from being a teacher observer related to the rubric that I don't remember what we call it here.
Danielson.
Yes, that. In my head goes SOEI. About that, the rigor of questioning during the lessons. And that I wasn't surprised to hear. I think that's that's very challenging period. I did notice a little bit of dissonance into we are grading based on standards, but then we also have to grow on the formative assessments. And then I know that the grading standards more of the summative assessment, but then what that gets really is into the differentiation or the ability of the teacher to differentiate. So as we think about, I hope we can prioritize that piece because it changes so quickly what a child can learn from one day to the other, that it is very important that as educators we are like very on top of, do I need to do a little bit more of support? So just kind of like when Tim says, I encourage us to do this, so I encourage us to do that, because that is imperative for differentiation. And then I'm gonna say something last. It's more to you, Eric, about just to clarify a piece that I always have when we talk about engagement in the schools, where some families will know, like, I have to keep, I have to be on top of my kid and make sure that you're taking this. And that is something that I know because I'm being an educator, and I just want to acknowledge that reality is not the same for among different cultures, and that the more that we actually try to have those internal controls within the schools. Like, I don't think it's fair to expect a parent who may be coming new to the country with a different belief about what the education system can do. I know where I grew up, like, teachers were, so, teachers are teaching all of the academics, and home we're teaching all of these values, right? And we're just gonna trust blindly what the schools are doing, and that was the norm. So it may take it some time for families from different cultures to learn that. I also think it's a responsibility in the district to also support families in understanding how the system here works so that they can get, up to speed as necessary. There's other things that happen, like in Latin American countries, most of the time kids don't go to the next grade if they're not ready. And I've seen a lot as a teacher that when you see a kid, a parent might say, oh, I think my kid's doing great because he was in second grade, he's going to third grade. Like, I think growing up, like, the threat was to being held back, and that is not a threat that here applies. So just that, just another word for that, culturally relevant parent engagement, and how important that is, because it's really like the kids are scattered in skills, and so are the families, and it's really not about what they want. Everyone, I think, does what they know best in how they learn. And so just to bring that voice also. I think that's it. I'm done.
Thank you.
Anything else before we let them go after this short interlude?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. This is very exciting to me to see, and I also want to commend you. I have seen the growth in PLCs in the last few years, teacher-led PLCs. There's always a call in an email about them, and that is amazing, because when teachers get to collaborate with each other, and especially that helps them plan and align for the next 6 weeks and go through a cycle. And I think that also can mirror what they can do themselves in their classrooms. And I think, this is not obviously proven, but when you share that there's more book clubs, there's more of this, there's more of that, I believe there's a connection between those, because that's what teachers are doing in the professional learning community. So thank you for that. All right. Old business.
Old business. All right, so yes, so just as a reminder, so we are passing consent agenda and moving past it. We are looking at policy 926, public relations and administrative guideline. And just as a reminder, while this is our third read, we're actually not voting on things this evening. So just as a reminder, this is in front of you after 3 reads. It has made changes through multiple rounds of board feedback, and we will be bringing this policy back in regard to board members and their roles in regard to public relations and representing a school, and just knowing that this will be here again as it reads, with no changes unless there is something to come in the meanwhile. This will be here again at our next meeting on May 1st. Transitioning on to the next policy, which is read number 2, visitors to school districts and buildings, policy 953 and 953.1. You will see some changes in regard to formatting. We also noticed a couple of components that are unnecessary and redundant within the policy, and so you'll see those are redlined and crossed out. And otherwise, there are no major proposed changes beyond that within this policy. And so we do have this for you for read number 2, and are able to take comments or questions today, or could be open to taking comments or questions at our next board meeting for a third read.
Do you have any questions for Superintendent Yunowski about these policies? We just.
I do
All right.
not.
All right, I am gonna keep on rolling.
All right.
So new business, so we're actually gonna just briefly mention as I roll through, because they'll all be back at our next meeting, fiscal host agreement for Richfield Ready. We are proposing to become the fiscal host for this program, so it would not have a significant impact on us, but would help us oversee, and we are already the fiscal host for some other programs. And so we have that for you in the packet, but
I would have guessed we already were.
yeah. So it is
Having interacted
a
with it.
partnership that supports the youth in community ed, in Richfield Public Schools, and then also Richfield Community. We had a budget presentation that is required to be passed as a revised budget, but we will look at that on May 1st and have that back for you for passage. Things continue to be solid and supported from a fiscal perspective. Then we do have Policy 620 for a first read, credit for learning and administrative guidelines to go along with that. And so this particular policy talks about how we recognize achievement through credits in our schools, other schools, post-secondary sites. There's also a guideline that goes along with it. We have that to you tonight for that first read, just to refamiliarize ourselves, and then we will have some updates prior to our next meeting. And so we could take comments tonight, otherwise, as often occurs, we can catch those in the coming 2 weeks prior to May 1st. And then the last non-voting item for you again tonight, and again, we will bring this back to vote on, Richfield Holy Angels Gymnastics Co-op, to also add in Bloomington, Kennedy, and Jefferson. So we have only 4 returning gymnasts, and so the goal, because you need 5 competitors to make a team, this is a group that is already collaborating together, but we would need to formally recognize to allow them to fully form that co-op, and so we are going to need to bring that back at our next meeting to get that official support, something that we have supported moves like this in the past. So you'll see that again in our next meeting also.
And the deadline for that, I'm reading, is 30 days prior to the first day of practice for that sport. So
That is correct. We're in
tonight's
good shape.
tonight's lack of action doesn't harm it.
Exactly.
Lack of
Exactly,
action.
exactly. And so with that, I'll transition it back to Paula Cole to
Okay.
turn us through things in the advanced planning.
So we have arrived quickly into advanced planning, legislative updates. I know Director Raki generally provides that. I'm gonna pass it to you, see what's going, I know. but-
Absolutely. So there is significant action happening. They're moving things forward, and omnibus finance proposals have now moved forward to be voted upon and acted upon in alignment with the omnibus education policies. And so we still remain in that waiting game. None of the information has changed. There looks like significant funding coming to schools, and then significant mandates that would require untold amount of dollars to cover the things that are also coming along with that. And so we hope that by May 1st, we'll have some more details in regard to that. And then also, prior to the end of May, we should have most likely a finalization of the session, because I believe they end right before Memorial Day. And so we'll get a further update. But again, no news at this time, just continuing the same trajectory.
Thank you. Any informations and questions from board members, including our student reps?
You go first.
After you.
Okay, thank you. So actually, we will be participating in a network session this Friday. Yeah, right. Yep. And then I think it's gonna be really awesome to see other student reps from other districts, and then I think we're gonna do discussions based that affect the school board. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what we do there and learn about other roles.
So wonderful, thank you.
I'd be very interested to hear how other districts do it, and if your experiences could be better, or maybe we're good, who knows? We'll find out.
So before Director Carter goes, let's make a note to make sure in our superintendent update, then we leave specific official space for our board reps, and put that in there as an
To
acknowledgement.
share out, yeah. Great idea.
I just want to go back to Tim's question. So it was a resolution. So, in which we need majority, right? Or not?
We need a
We're not-
quorum to have a
Quorum.
vote.
We
Well,
aren't
we need
able,
quorum.
right, we're,
Right, but my question is so, to Tim's point, if it's, because it's today, so that
There's
means.
no concerns for timing. We
Tim
have
was
plenty
saying
of time.
gymnastics is in 23, 24, and it only has to be in 30 days
Oh,
before
got
the
it.
start of the
Yeah,
season.
yeah.
We're in good shape.
I don't have any concern about the timing.
I thought you were saying it needed to be done today.
No, I said we are not harmed by our lack of
Yeah,
action.
got it. Thank you, I misunderstood.
No, nor are the gymnasts.
Yeah,
You know.
fair enough.
That's reassuring.
Yes, what I would do, just to be clear, is we would get the intent of support. I
Yeah.
would get a verbal indication, and we would allow them to move forward, so that it did not restrain.
Right.
Is what we would do if we were on a tighter deadline.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Last week, I was able to take, we were invited, the whole board was invited to attend a tour of District 287. And so I was able to make that, and it was a really, for a building I've driven by literally thousands of times, it was the first time I've toured the rest of the building and seen the operation over there. It was really neat. And it was just nice to meet the people who operate the South Education Center, or at 287, and then had another opportunity to visit our own program over there at Transitions Plus while we were there. But it was really neat, and there were some questions that came up and things that they have needs for that gave me something to think about and see if there are ways we can collaborate with them on that, just sort of ancillary supports they might need for things that we probably have. So.
Thank you for going.
Allegra was also there. And their board chair was there also. It was Crystal.
Yes.
So we had 3 of us.
I've seen also, I've enjoyed seeing some of us celebrating our staff in the pictures. It's been really great to see all of the excitement. So I think that I rarely speak on behalf of everybody, but I think we may agree that we want to just say thank you to our wonderful staff everywhere, doing the hard work of educating the kids of our future. And so thank you so very much for everything that you do. And let's see, do we have any suggested or future agenda items? We already have the one we're gonna hear reporting back from our student representatives. Is there anything else that we want to have the administration to add to for future review?
I have nothing.
Do you want that policy?
I've already provided mine earlier, but
Please
but
stay, it's okay.
I can say it again.
Yeah,
Microphone it.
Microphone it, phone it in.
YouTube it.
I would like us to discuss policy 978. There's more detail. One of the questions in our, I've said athletic committee, but the CAAC, right, the athletic committee.
Competitive Activities Advisory.
Thank you, that one.
Yeah.
We were discussing, this is not a proposal, we're saying we're talking about electronic tickets. And so in that discussion, one of the things that came up is it said, well, is that gonna put a challenge on some of our families? Right, because of the fact that it's like, do they have access to the internet? Do they have access to go ahead and buy tickets? Is it, right, does it make more issues? And then while I was listening to the discussion, it occurred to me, I'm like, we offer our students the ability, like the students who have free or prorated lunch, we give them discounts for activities. Should we be giving their families the same courtesy for admission to events? Or are we keeping their families away, which is doing a disservice to our community? And so I didn't have a good answer to that, and I kind of asked it, and then I was asking Steve kind of before the meeting. And so I'd like to see that brought up. And since it also coincides with that policy being due, I think it's great for us as a board to discuss it.
Thank you, yes.
Fully explained.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
So we have future meeting dates. We'll be meeting again May 1st. Very important that day, there's going to be a board study session starting at 5 o'clock, so 2 hours prior the regular board meeting starting at 7. And then we'll have our next meeting in May on May 15th, which will be a regular board meeting with public comment. All right, and then looking around, see if there's anything else anyone wants to bring. Okay, so I guess we'll adjourn this meeting at 8:37. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.